Hi, I'm Brandy. I'll be with you throughout the day today. I'm one of the founding members of EcoAmmo, a small green business here in Edmonton, and I'm also an active citizen, a troublemaker, and a champion for this city. Some of you are familiar faces. Some of you we haven't met before. I hope to meet you throughout the day. I'd like to welcome you to Edmonton's first community energy forum that doesn't have oil and gas. Here today. They might be here. It's good. It's a transition. The City of Edmonton is proud to host this event to discuss issues of energy transition, building a sustainable future, and climate change. It's kind of nice to be able to say that in a big room now, hey? With all the changes that have been going on. We hope you leave educated, inspired, and ready to tackle issues of energy transition in your home, community, and your city. I have a few housekeeping items this morning. First, everyone, take out your phones. Take them out, hold them up. Now throw them. No, I'm just kidding. Hold them up. Put them to silent. Yeah, you got them? Okay, now while you have them out, remember that the handle today for Twitter and Instagram is YEG Energy Forum. That's YEG Energy Forum. Share all that you learn here today. Also, there's no printed programs to reduce waste. So while you have your phones out, you can go visit eventmobi.com/ECEF for the entire program, and you'll see that come back up on the screen here. It's fitting that we're meeting here at the Shaw Conference Centre today. The Shaw Conference team is committed to continuous improvement and are working hard on local food sourcing, composting, waste diversion, and energy efficiency. The Shaw team has also donated air plants, which you'll see today, which everyone can take home with them. I'd also like to thank our sponsors today, Landmark Homes, NMAX, IBI Group, ATCO Gas, EPCOR, and Bullfrog Power. We have two very exciting keynote speakers for you this morning. First, we're going to hear from our mayor, Don Iveson, and after that, all the way from the Bronx, we're going to hear from the fabulous Majora Carter. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome this morning Mayor Don Iveson.
Well, thanks, Brandy, and you'll forgive me, I'm still having my first cup of coffee this morning. I'd like to, first of all, begin by acknowledging that we're here gathered together on the traditional territory of the Treaty 6 First Nations, and hearing the echoes and still spoken today, the languages of the Cree, the Dene, the Saulteaux, the Blackfoot, the Nakota Sioux, and now the languages and shared cultures of the Métis and Inuit peoples and settlers and descendants of settlers from around the world. And as we reflect, as we should from time to time, on Treaty 6 and what the spirit of that document, and more importantly the relationship is, it is fundamentally one of peace and one of mutual prosperity, which is, I think, something useful to reflect on in the light of the tragedy in Paris yesterday. I'd ask you to just join me in a moment of silence and reflection. Thank you. So we're here to talk about energy, and there's a lot of it in our city, always has been. Going back to the 1880s, they discovered in coal mines that actually run into the hill behind this building and all up and down the valley, coal, baby. It was fantastic. And so 150 coal mines were dug into the banks of this river because at the time that was the best way people knew how to heat their homes and run their industries. And it powered the economy, it created jobs, and it helped build this city. And our love of coal, our relationship with it has changed, but not diminished. In fact, it's grown. And we talk a lot about electrification of this, that, and the other thing, our transportation systems, other systems. And it's always important to point out to people that today when we do that, the tailpipe for your electric vehicle is out at Lake Wadman and it's attached to a coal plant. And so some things have changed. Those coal plants are some of the best coal plants in the world, that is a fact. The City of Edmonton actually built some of those back when we were in the power generating business, when we owned our own utility. And then EPCOR built some more of those plants, which was a wholly owned subsidiary of the city. And we no longer own those plants. And I can tell you right now, I'm really glad. And I know some of you had strong feelings about the divestiture of Capital Power from EPCOR, which was a decision council made about 5-6 years ago. But given the risk that is manifesting in terms of regulatory changes and carbon pricing and concern for emissions, it is most appropriate that risk is shared by the market. And we own about 9% of Capital Power. It remains a great company headquartered in our city, and it is adapting. It will be resilient to the new future because they're looking ahead. And I can't speak for them, but they know full well that energy transition is coming. And they're planning for it, and they will need to be creative in the way that private industry can and is in order to adapt to that. And that risk is shared now with other shareholders rather than solely being on the City of Edmonton. And that's, in a way, that's also unshackled us a little bit from our dependence on the dividend coming out of that business. And I think that's allowed us to take a little broader view about energy and energy transition. So the next energy story, of course, as we know, starts in 1947 with the discovery of oil not too far south of here by Devon. And then our relationship with that commodity continues in all its rich complexity as we ride the commodity price roller coaster up and down and up and down and up and down. But it continues to, much as coal did 120, 130 years ago, provide many jobs and also invite the opportunity for all kinds of innovation. And so much of the innovation that happens in Edmonton is about making the oil and gas business more cost competitive, more environmentally responsible. And so we give ourselves a hard time about our energy industry sometimes, and we apologize for it. But we shouldn't, because they're complex resources, and we've done an extraordinary job of creating new solutions to help reduce the environmental impact of what we do when we're actually getting the resources and adding value to the resources. That's the only reason we're still at all competitive in it as a high-cost producer with really, really complex resources. It was innovation like Dr. Charles Clark who, using his washing machine, innovated a way to get oil out of the oil sands. And it's continuous innovation that is trying to turn that into an industry that, in whatever cost environment, can still be successful. And so we've been problem solvers here when it comes to energy for a long time. And we're going to continue to be as the world continues to need those resources through a period of transition. But here's the exciting thing that's happening around us is that there is a global transition happening around energy. And the City of Edmonton wants to insert itself squarely in the middle of that. And we're not starting from scratch, absolutely not. Though Council just in the last year or so really came to fruition after several years of engagement with our public, innovative public involvement, including the citizens panel that we assembled on climate and energy in partnership with Dr. David Kahane, who's here, and the folks at the Alberta Climate Dialogue Project. So we've heard from our citizens, and this was a great project, and I went to a lot of the meetings. And how many of you who are here today were a part of that panel? I think there were a few of you, maybe. Yeah, there's a couple of hands up over here. So people who were engaged in that, it was about 60 Edmontonians drawn from demographically representative groups around the city. So not just geographically, not just by age, not just by cultural background, but also by attitude about climate change and energy. So this group of people had the full breadth and diversity of a representative sample of Edmontonians in terms of people who desperately thought we needed to be doing more yesterday on climate change to people who said, I'm not sure that that has anything to do with us. It's like solar flares or something, right? And the amazing thing after this process was that even if people still weren't sure about the anthropogenic production of carbon and its link to climate change, they were persuaded that energy transition made sense for economic reasons and made sense for air quality reasons. So they were able to build, as a group of 60 people, with support from experts in a deliberative fashion, a consensus that energy transition was the right thing for Edmonton to do. And by the way, it's happening out there in the world anyway. We don't want to be left behind, so there's a whole reputation question to this as well. So that was really, really solid public engagement that I think laid a foundation for Council to, and this blew my mind, unanimously approve the energy transition strategy. Because it was quite clear I knew I was going to vote for it, but I wasn't sure about everybody else. But the argument was strong, not just that there are real advantages for us, as I mentioned, around savings. We modeled out at a high level that if we do this, we're going to come out ahead, because just through efficiency alone, but also through reducing our exposure to commodity price fluctuations around the fossil fuels that we're dependent on today, and those regulatory risks that are out on the horizon all the time around combustion, that there is an upside. And we didn't even try to monetize the public health benefits, but everybody knows instinctively that clean air is good, regardless of where you sit on any particular spectrum, political or otherwise. Pretty much everybody gets that. And that's at stake, because we've heard that air quality is challenged in our region increasingly because of the various combustions that we rely on right now. And so the other benefit, of course, of us doing our part, in addition to the reputational upside, is that we will have the knowledge that we are actually contributing to solutions around the largest global crisis that we've seen ever as a civilization. If that's not overstating it. It probably is overstating it, but I can't, I think it's true. And I think that there's a deep unease in many of us about the sense that we are not doing enough. And that's not confined to Edmontonians, it's not confined to Albertans, it's people all around the world who are speaking up in different ways. They're speaking up at the ballot box, and I think we've seen that in the last 6 months in this province and in this country. And that's encouraging. That's really encouraging that collective consciousness, that collective sense that we need to do more is being manifested, and now, hopefully just in time to get to Paris. So this is about more than just talking about doing the right thing. We have to actually implement some significant changes, and there's lots of opportunity. One of the areas where we've shown actually considerable leadership, and where I have great pride in what we've done so far in the city, is around energy efficient buildings. So we have a couple of folks here who have been leaders. Some of you will know Peter Amarangan from Habitat Studio, who has helped build many of the net zero homes that contribute to our the distinction, that's the word I'm looking for. I need a little more coffee this morning. The distinction of having the highest number of net zero homes in the country. Nobody knows that, but it's phenomenal. And Peter and builders like Peter have created that. And then we have Reza Nasri, who's one of our sponsors here, who runs Landmark Homes. And if you haven't had a chance to go see the Landmark Homes house building factory, it's kind of magic. The little factory music plays in your mind as you watch robots and human beings in a controlled environment build an entire house and create, 1 5-gallon pail of sawdust and a few little offcuts at the end. So material efficiency, but also quality control through the process that allows them to build homes that are now net zero ready. Net zero ready. So at the commercial scale. And how many homes did you build last year, Reza? More than 1,000, eh? 800 last year. 800 net zero ready homes. So these are Edmonton's success stories of which we should be tremendously proud. And on the commercial side too, part of the legacy of all of this industrial expansion and living in a cold climate is that our commercial and institutional construction companies have been innovators as well. And I won't name all of them, but Chandos Construction in particular, which built the Mosaic Center. If you haven't had a chance to go see the Mosaic Center, that is the world's largest northern climate net zero commercial building right here in Edmonton. Can you believe that? I can believe it. I helped bolt the last solar panel onto the side of it. That was one of the best days on the job for me. It was a cold day, But the satisfaction of getting to participate a little bit in that project and now having the opportunity to talk about it as really national leadership with my colleagues around the Big City Mayor's table, for example. We have much to be proud of when it comes to building technology and building innovation here in Edmonton. And so the issue is we need to scale that. We need to scale all of that experience. And some of it's about regulatory changes in terms of catching up the building code for energy efficiency requirements. Some of it is about supporting the orientation of new homes on lots so that they face the sun, so that even if PV isn't cost competitive for that particular home buyer today, that if the home is net zero ready and the conduit is put in, the cost of eventually putting it on when the homeowner thinks it's right, when the incentive structures are there, when the cost of the PV is at a point where it makes sense for the homeowner, that it's an easy thing to add. And that there isn't, a garage in the way or a tree in the way or something else. So planning for solar ready, for example, is a really important thing we can do on the renewable side, but it's also part of the overall program around the buildings that we're building. And then renovations. Energy efficiency retrofit is a massive economic development opportunity. We still haven't figured out as an economy the right way to monetize those savings for people so that it's easier for them to invest. But as soon as those price signals are there, the number of people who have big warehouses that it's going to make sense to add a few more inches of foam on the roof and go back and fill in the cracks and do the spray foam or whatever makes sense for their business, that's going to be a growth sector. And it just so happens that we have a lot of Edmontonians who are really good at doing that kind of work. Some of them are even looking for work right now. So we should be seeing energy transition, in fact, as an economic opportunity. So energy efficient buildings is a huge part of the strategy, and it's a massive part of our emissions profile. And so progress there will help us achieve our goals in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and then also through reducing the need for combustion, increasing our air quality. So the other big shift, and obviously the city talks about this a lot, and we don't always talk about it in terms of climate change, we tend to talk about it in terms of congestion, is the transportation mode shift. Mode shift is nerdy planner speak for people choose to be doing something other than driving their cars. They shift their mode of transportation to, so you'll hear that shorthand all the time at City Hall. We're talking about mode shift. What we're talking about is giving people palatable or even desirable options to the car. And, many Edmontonians, that is their only choice. Many Edmontonians would make a different choice if the bus came more frequently and went more directly to their destination. And that's one of the reasons our transit review is diving deep on looking at reconfiguring our transit system to run more efficiently and serve people better. But on top of that, there's obviously the build out of the whole light rail system, which has been a priority for me. And thank goodness it's a priority for Minister Sohi, the federal minister responsible for working with us to finish the LRT system. And it's taken me a week to stop calling him Councillor Sohi, but now that I automatically call him Minister Sohi, I get really excited. For Majora, just so you know, one of our city councillors, a colleague of mine who was elected to City Hall at the same time as me, was just elected in our most recent federal election and made our infrastructure minister, which is I've also been calling it the Minister of the $125 billion happy grab bag, which is the infrastructure pot in the Liberal platform, and also the Minister of keeping the big city mayors happy. And so I volunteered to help Amarjee do that with some suggestions. So, and then the Minister of Transportation at the province, also a former city councillor, also a bus driver, as was Councillor Sohi, but both of them big transit fans. And we haven't had the three of us in the same conversation yet, but we've sort of each had the conversation with each other that we want to achieve build out of the light rail systems in both Edmonton and Calgary working together, which is now, that seemed like a stretch goal even a year or two ago, and now it seems quite possible that over the next 10 to 20 years, depending on the pace of the flow of money, that we might be able to actually reach all of the major town centers in each part of the city and even out into the region, out towards the airport, up towards St. Albert, that we might be able to actually do that. And the importance of that is not just congestion relief and giving people options to the car, it's also that with that comes the opportunity to do significant transit-oriented development, which we know has a much lower environmental footprint or ecological impact per person, because people are living in attached dwellings, which tend to have a lower energy requirement because they share walls with each other rather than with the cold outside air. They tend to be more material efficient to construct as well because they share walls. And people tend to, partly because of cost, but also because the amenities are there, to walk places, such as the LRT station, such as the grocery store, such as their kids' school. And all of that reduces their greenhouse gas footprint. It also actually, just as a by-the-by, if you're looking for another argument for why making this density shift and making this transportation shift, which altogether I describe as kind of an urban shift for our city, the other upside, there's two big upsides to this that don't necessarily manifest at the municipal level, so they're not always part of our argument, but I'll share them with you anyway because I think they're critically important. One is that you can imagine, and some of you, I'm making some assumptions based on the age of some of you in the crowd, that you're either thinking about buying a home or you've recently bought one. And most Edmontonians, their default choice is one house, say for $400,000, and a couple of $25,000 cars. And so total outlay, $450,000. And you can manage, hopefully, if you've got job security and you're confident and you've got that low rate mortgage, you can manage making the payments on the two cars and the one house. And the bank might have said, you can't qualify for $425 on the house. You can only qualify for $400 on the house. And the problem is, if you could qualify for $425 on a brownstone in a transit-oriented development, on the condition that you were going to buy one car instead of two, this is called location-efficient mortgages. We're still trying to work with CMHC to get them to support this more actively with federal mortgage regulations. But if that household is able, because of proximity to services, proximity to transit, to choose to be a one-car household instead of a two-car household, fast forward 25 years. When you have paid off your $425,000 mortgage, you're now $25,000 richer, assuming your place appreciated no value over that period of time. But how much value do you think the car appreciated in value over the 25 years? No, you depreciated probably 3 or 4 cars over that period of time. So which is a better wealth creation strategy for Edmontonians? Which is a better economic development strategy for Edmontonians? Location-efficient living with transportation options. So this is not just about the environment, it's also about the economy. And by the way, the public health benefits of people who live in those kind of urban environments and their lower rates of obesity, their lower rates of cardiovascular disease, and their lower rates of some correlations around mental health challenges. You think about the most expensive thing we do as a province is healthcare. If we can help steer that ship in a slightly different direction, we can start to free up money for things like energy transition, those luxuries like energy transition and climate change, right? If we get our public policy act together. And so for me, transit is not just about air quality and moving people more efficiently. It's also about building a city that is healthier and wealthier. And so we're going to continue to push for that because it's critical to our environmental goals as well. So I'm just putting it in that broader context. So it also means supporting not just at the big transit-oriented development nodes, but everywhere else where it makes sense, that building in and that building up of the city. And so that's one of the reasons why the city has, against some resistance, pushed for more opportunities to build garage suites, more opportunities for garden suites, more opportunities for 50-foot lot subdivision to develop skinny homes. And we'll continue to look for opportunities to allow more density to make it not only economically feasible, but also more efficient, more land efficient, for more people to live close to those services and close to that transportation infrastructure. So that is a major rationale. There is an environmental rationale, certainly, to our work towards implementing our infill roadmap. There's also a fiscal rationale, by the way, and it mirrors the environmental one very nicely, which is the simple idea that, and somebody's accused us recently, they said, oh, this infill stuff's just a cash grab, and we're like, what? But you take a 50-foot lot that has a $350,000, 60-year-old energy sieve of a post-war bungalow on it, with 2 bedrooms, maybe 3, all of which are very small. And yes, that's important affordable housing, and it needs to be replaced. And probably the best place to replace it is in a garage suite or in an apartment or something like that, or a basement suite, in terms of relative affordability. But if you take that lot and you razz the old house that's at the end of its life as a structure, really, if it hasn't been kept up. If it's been kept up, if it's been renovated, great. But if it's at the end of its life, you chop the lot in half and you put up a couple of $500,000 or $600,000 skinnies, and yes, that's not necessarily as affordable, but relative to the $1.3 million mega house that would probably go up there otherwise over time, you've just doubled the number of families, and you've doubled the efficiency of the pipes and the sidewalk and the road. And the pipes and the sidewalk and the road is the most expensive thing we do. It's also, by the way, very energy intensive for us to replace those when we come in and do neighborhood renewal, which we are committed to maintaining the pace of work on neighborhood renewal. Just by the way, we're gonna move some things around so we don't have to raise your taxes to do it. So we're committed to not slowing down that work. But the efficiency of that work, the deployment of your money, is made more efficient through infill and through density. And so there's a beyond an environmental imperative, there's a fiscal one for us for this work as well. But finally, there's some other really important work around where we get our energy from, and in particular our heat, and in particular our electricity. And our energy transition strategy looks to opportunities for local generation and supporting that, whether it's at the combined heat and power district energy scale, which we're working closely with EPCOR and ENMAX on putting a district energy system, finally, 30 years later, into our downtown, which will have considerable greenhouse gas reduction and long-term cost-effective savings for the city and anybody else who plugs their buildings into it. And there's a lot of buildings that are the right age to plug into it because their boilers are miling out, and so this is a big transition opportunity not to be missed. Likewise, at Blatchford, we're looking at a district energy system, and we're still working through the numbers of it, that aims to, in addition to the very efficient buildings, achieve net zero outcome for the entire community of 30,000 people, which will be leadership of which we can all be proud. And then, of course, those opportunities I mentioned early for solar readiness, for example, in new construction projects, we want to be able to support that with policy tools as well. So finally, altogether, there's sort of 150 good ideas in the strategy, and we're going to have to work together to prioritize and implement them. And that comes to the question which you're probably wondering, which is when the mayor is talking about restraint and discipline in the budget, what's going to happen to energy transition? And I can tell you one very simple message, which is that clean air and climate leadership is not a nice to have. It is essential. So within the scarce amount of dollars that we have for reallocation in our budget, I'm confident we'll be able to find resources to take the first and next steps on energy transition and on continued leadership from the city in terms of our purchase of green power and, as a corporate citizen, what we're doing to reduce our own footprint, as well as supporting the community energy transition strategy. So there's a package, for example, that calls for a $2 million bump next year and continuing to support the program of the community energy transition strategy. And I'm confident that we'll be able to get that funded. It also asks for $8 million in year 3, though, and I'll be honest with you that I won't be able to get that funded. But that's okay, and let me tell you why. Because that $8 million bump, which we always saw on the horizon, was the incentive packages that the city was going to have to start contemplating doing if the provincial government showed no leadership whatsoever. And hopefully we can agree that the provincial government has seen fit to and is signaling that they plan to take strong leadership in the coming months and years on this file. And it is we think, properly their jurisdiction to administer as regulators of the electricity system and so on and so forth, to work with us to put consistent incentive programs and price signals in, whether it's a carbon price or whether it's other pricing mechanisms on rate or on bill charges, whatever it is. That should really be done consistently province-wide. We were prepared to contemplate doing it alone as a city in the absence of provincial leadership, but thank goodness the order of government responsible, and which has way more of your money than the city, is stepping forward and proposing to take that kind of leadership. So we won't dial back the $2 million to build our program, because that's really our community development role. And we will wait and see what the province does with bated breath to see what the Leach panel says, for example. But if there is a carbon price, and there should be, and I've been consistent about that since not a politically popular stand to take 8 years ago as a councillor, but I've always thought that. Because if we have the right price signals, you don't need to cajole or incent or bribe people into doing the right thing. It just makes business sense. And I think we're headed for that. And I think that means you won't need the city to pop in with an additional $8 million of your property taxes to try to get energy transition happening. So I'm confident we're going to continue the work, that we're going to continue the leadership, and that our role is going to be to rally the community, prioritize strategies, and work to support the provincial government in achieving the goals that they've laid out, which are entirely consistent, as I understand them, with what we've proposed. So finally, though, for this to work, this is about way more than 1 or 2 or 3 orders of government working together. This really, to be successful, and it is aptly named, has to be a community development strategy, a community energy transition strategy. And I'm so heartened to see so many of you here interested in being a part of that today, and there will be further opportunities to be involved, in particular through a stakeholder committee that we're putting together, a steering committee for implementation of this. And we just recommended the appointment of Councillor Michael Walters and Councillor Ben Henderson to be the council liaisons, and we're reinstituting, essentially by another name, the Environment Initiative that I led for 6 years. And the two of them, and I'll be still deeply involved, will be the council leads on this work, but we're also creating, like I said, that advisory committee, the same way we have for Edmonton Transit Service Advisory Board. There will be a committee that advises council on what we're doing well and what we're not doing well when it comes to energy transition. And some of you may desire to be involved in that work. And so we invite you to consider that and to consider through different means taking leadership in your community. I know many of you do in your businesses. I know there's a lot of green entrepreneurs in the room here. I know many of you, and I admire your work and your leadership. That creates transformation as well. Many of you, I know from your community league work, are working to bolt solar panels on your community league and create discussion about renewable energy and what that can look like in a community context. I know some of you are working on the Green Schools Initiative. So there is a phenomenal amount of leadership already taking place in the city, and the idea of having this strategy and having this group of people harnessing it all is to try to gather that up so that when we tell good stories about what's happening in Edmonton, we know about many of them and you hear about each other's work so that you can be further inspired, rather than toiling, as I know many of us have who are concerned about these issues, feeling like it's the real work isn't happening, it's not getting done. So I think what you should take away from this, I hope, is that your city is deeply committed to this, your council is deeply committed to this, and seeing a room like this, we know that Edmontonians are deeply committed to this as well, which gives me the hope that we are going to achieve our goals around energy and climate transition working together.